This $21 commander deck generates unstoppable exponential value every turn by sacrificing and reanimating our creatures. Champion of Stray Souls is like a repeatable living death. For 5 mana and tapping it, we can sacrifice X creatures to return X other creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield. If we do this over and over again, we can get a bunch of value from creatures entering and leaving the battlefield. And it's hard to interact with, since if they kill one of our creatures, we can just reanimate it again with Champion of Stray Souls. And if they killed Champion of Stray Souls, we can just use its second activated ability, returning it from our graveyard to the top of our library. If we have creatures that mill us when they enter or die, and creatures that mix tokens when they enter or die, we can sacrifice those tokens to bring back the creatures milled, giving us a bigger pile of creatures every time we do this. So we play 11-year-old Urborg Tyrant and Cola of the Claw. They both make a 2/2 for each creature that died this turn when they enter. Tobias Doomed Conqueror does the same when it dies. These will make a lot of 2/2s because we're sacrificing our entire board every turn, maybe even multiple times every turn. I'll talk about how we can easily do this later. Hallowed Spiritkeeper makes a 1/1 for each creature in our graveyard when it dies. Boss's Chauffeur enters with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature we control, and it gets an additional +1/+1 counter on it whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control. And it makes a 1/1 citizen for each counter on it when it dies. This also grows exponentially if we keep sacrificing it and bringing it back, since it makes a lot of tokens when it dies, and it enters with even more counters on it because we have a bunch of creatures, so it'll make even more tokens when it dies again, and will enter with even more counters on it, and so on. Anax, Hardened in the Forge, makes a 1/1 whenever another non-token creature we control dies, and makes 2 1/1s if the creature has 4 or more power. But Infested Thrinax is even better. When it enters, until end of turn, whenever a non-token creature we control dies, we make X 1/1s, where X is the creature's power. This ability doesn't require Infested Thrinax to be on the battlefield, and this ability stacks. So you can have multiples of this effect if Infested Thrinax entered more times. We can bring more creatures back with these tokens, but we need creatures in our graveyard to bring back, so we play Stitcher Supplier. It mills 3 cards when it enters and when it dies. Circle of the Land Druid mills 4 when it enters and gets us a land from our graveyard to our hand when it dies. Sadistic Brute Tyrant mills 3 when it enters, and it also makes a 2/2 zombie whenever we mill 1 or more creatures. Corpse Connoisseur, Violent Tumor, and Gravebreaker Lamia all search our library for a creature and puts it in our graveyard when they enter. So half Cultist mills 1 whenever a creature dies, and Death Oasis mills 2 whenever a non-token creature we control dies. Murder of Crows lets us loot whenever another creature dies, which is better than milling since we can choose what to put in our graveyard, and our hand will be amazing. Similarly, Body Launderer connives whenever another non-token creature we control dies. It also reanimates a creature with equal or lesser power when it dies. We can also get more creatures with Geological Appraiser. It discovers 3 when it enters, which means we exile the top cards of our library until we exile a spell with mana value 3 or less. We can cast it for free or put it in our hand. Dinosaur Egg is even better. It discovers X when it dies, and X is its toughness, and it has Evolve, which means it gets a +1/+1 counter whenever a creature with greater power enters. The +1/+1 counter grows its toughness, so we discover more when it dies, and it'll get a lot of counters on it because we are reanimating a bunch of creatures at the same time, meaning a bunch of creatures with power greater than 0 are entering. Spinner of Souls draws us a creature whenever another non-token creature we control dies. Liliana Standard Bearer lets us draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of creatures that died this turn when it enters. This grows exponentially if we can activate Champion of Stray Souls multiple times a turn. We should also keep our opponents in check though. Aether Channeler bounces a non-land permanent when it enters, but if there's no good targets, we could just make a bird or draw a card. Canopy Tomb Sentinel exiles a non-land permanent when it enters from a graveyard. Killing a few things are nice, but Butcher of Malakir can kill all creatures our opponents have and will ever have. It makes our opponents sacrifice a creature whenever a creature we control dies. Slayer of the Hateborn deals X damage to any target whenever a creature enters from our graveyard, and X is that creature's power. Sometimes this can kill a lot of creatures, and sometimes this can kill our opponents. Shield Broker steals a creature when it enters. All this value can be repeated if we untap Champion of Stray Souls to activate it again. We can untap it with creatures that untap a creature when they enter. So if we have one of these, we can activate Champion of Stray Souls twice on our turn. But if we have two of these or an Intruder Alarm, we can activate Champion of Stray Souls as many times as we want in a turn, as long as we have enough mana. So we want a bunch of mana. That's why we play Viridian Emissary and Primal Druid. They get us a land when they die. Clifftop Lookout gets us a land when it enters. Solemn Simulacrum gets us a land when it enters and draws us a card when it dies. Power Stone Engineer makes a tapped Power Stone when it dies. A Power Stone can tap for 1 mana, but it can only be spent on activated abilities and artifacts. Arbalest Engineer also makes a tapped Power Stone when it enters, or you can do 1 damage to any target, or it can put a counter on a creature. Great Desert Prospector makes a Power Stone for each creature we control when it enters, including tokens. Patron of the Arts makes a treasure token when it enters and when it dies. Priest of Gigs makes 3 black mana when it enters. Paragon Drake untaps 5 lands when it enters. Shifter of Skulls makes a 1/1 that can be sacked for 1 mana whenever another non-token creature we control dies. Zerda the Dawnmaker reduces Champion of Stray Souls' activated ability by 2 mana, making it 3 mana to activate every time. All this value is amazing, but we still need to win the game. So we play Vengeful Blood Witch and il-Kor. They drain our opponents when our creatures die, which is really good since we're sacrificing our entire board over and over again, but not as good as Stalking Vengeance. It deals damage equal to our creature's power when they die to target player or planeswalker. And we have Teysa Karlov to double all our death triggers. Our entire deck is built around Champion of Stray Souls, but we can't make it our commander. So we use the same trick as the Landblink deck from this video and make Codie our commander. It has a 4 mana activated ability that adds uber mana and gives our next spell Cascade for instants and sorceries. So if we activate Codie and cast a 1 mana instant or sorcery, we get to cast the only 0 mana sorcery in our deck for free, and it's Profane Tutor. It searches our library for a card and puts it in our hand. That's how we get Champion of Stray Souls. But we can't cast it if Codie is in play, since Codie also says we can't cast permanent spells. We can solve this by sacrificing Codie. So all the 1 mana spells we play sacrifice a creature to do something. 4 of them kill a creature, 2 of them draw 2, 1 makes 3 1/1s, and 2 make 3 mana. We can potentially cast Champion of Stray Souls on turn 4 with Burnt Offering. We play 37 lands and that's the deck. It only costs $21.92 at the time of recording, not including basic lands. The deck list is in the description. But here's some honorable mentions. Seedborn Muse and Awakening untaps all our things on every opponent's upkeep, quadrupling our value. Training Grounds is like a Zerda. It makes Champion's activated ability only 3 mana to activate. Voltborn Tyrant makes a copy of itself when it dies, and it draws cards and gains its life whenever a big creature enters. Mind Slicer makes everyone discard their hand when it dies, and we want creatures in our graveyard. Carter golds all our opponents' creatures when it enters, so if we have 2 or more untappers, an Intruder Alarm, Seaborn Muse, or Awakening, creatures can never attack us. Pitiless Plunderer makes a treasure whenever another creature dies. World Shaper returns all lands from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped under our control when it dies, which is really good since we're milling a lot. And congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to see more crazy decks like this one.